Come and kneel down, be not ashamed to be humble. Nothing is more important than this moment. April the 24th, a day of remembrance for Soviet Armenians and Armenians throughout the world. On the night of April the 24th, 1915, when the world was engulfed in the darkness of the First World War, the Young Turk government severed the collective Armenian mind by deporting and massacring Armenian notables, intellectuals, and clergymen. Every April the 24th, His Holiness Vaskan I, Supreme Patriarch and Catholicos of all Armenians, together with the rest of the country, comes to the Dzidzer-Nakapet Armenian Martyrs Monument in Yerevan to commemorate the 1915 genocide of the minority Armenian citizens of the Ottoman Empire. In 301 AD, the Kingdom of Armenia, situated on the western edge of Asia, became the first state in the world to adopt Christianity as its national religion. And despite numerous wars and attempts at conversion by outside powers, Armenians clung to the Christian teachings of St. Gregory the Illuminator, their first Catholicos. To this day, the Church retains its original character and rituals. With the offering of Madach, a holy sacrifice, Armenians thank God for their successes, for healing their children, and for alleviating the aches and pains that are woven into the fabric of living. This strong religious belief is one of the primary factors that has kept the Armenian national and cultural identity distinct. A small nation at the crossroads of various empires, Armenia has been attacked, looted, and subjugated repeatedly, and repeatedly Armenians have reassured their will to survive. Legend has it that when God was creating the world, he had only a handful of stones left by the time he got to Armenia. Yet this rocky terrain did not deter the Armenians. They extracted beauty from this barren landscape. The Temple of Gani, built by King Dutad in the 1st century AD, supported by 24 Ionic columns, this pre-Christian temple is one of the few surviving edifices that used to grace the kingdom. These temples were filled with votive sculptures and richly embroidered metalwork. It is said that iron ore was first mined in these highlands between the Black Sea and northern Iraq. My ancestors were smiths back in the time of the Ararat kingdom. I learned my craft from my father and uncles. What I know, I teach my wife and children. This tradition is much older than my family. Our inspiration dates back thousands of years to the cave people, whose rock paintings were discovered in the inaccessible parts of the mountains. What you see here did not come from India, Egypt or Persia. It was born of Armenia and my soul. Artzrun Berberian is one of the few remaining traditional silversmiths. Monk Mesrop Mashtots, inventor of the Armenian alphabet in 404 AD. His creation ushered in the golden era of Armenian literature, and Armenians began to emerge into the light. The alphabet is still being used by Armenians throughout the world. dative monastery perpetuated this renaissance by serving as a center of both spiritual and higher education. Within its cloistered walls, devout monks created countless illuminated manuscripts. I founded the city of Erepune to strengthen the country and to frighten my enemies. The land there was desolate. What I have created is a miracle, and I have deployed 6,600 troops there. That's how King Arkishti described how he founded Erepune, now called Yerevan, 2,773 years ago. Initially, the city was a mere garrison, yet its riches were too tempting for warmongering neighbors to resist. The history of Armenia is an unbroken agony of attacks by Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Mongols, Turks, and others. These successive occupations depleted Armenia's riches and kept its borders in continuous flux. Old men still remember Armenian villages on the lower slopes of Mount Ararat. The best view of this symbolic mountain is from Khovirab, a monastery that has withstood repeated Turkish attacks for centuries. The monastery is still inside Armenia's borders. The mountain is not. Turkish border towers now separated from Soviet Armenia. Yet the loss of this biblical mountain was not the worst fate that befell the Armenians. One morning in May 1915, we were surprised to wake up and find Hazo, our village in western Armenia, surrounded by Turkish soldiers. We hadn't heard of the forced deportations and massacres. In the evening, the soldiers attacked. My brother took me in his arms and tried to run away. Several shots hit him. Before he died, he managed to carry me to the river. I hid there and saw many women jumping into the water and drowning. I was 7 years old. On July the 22nd, 1915, an order came from the Turkish government. It gave us 7 days to prepare for deportation. The elders of the villages got together and decided not to leave their homeland. 5,000 of us villagers moved to Musadagh, the mountain of Moses. All we had was 99 hunting guns. The old men prayed, the women baked bread, and the men fought. The fighting lasted for 40 days. Thomas Martirosyan was 5 years old when he lived through the events that were later made famous in Franz Werfel's novel, The 40 Days of Musadagh. The book is a monument to those courageous men and women who fell victims to the first genocide of the 20th century. A shifting carpet woven with the threads of blood-stained destinies. Again and again comes the mother who for days carries her child, dead of starvation, in a sack on her shoulders, until at last, unable any longer to bear the stench, her own people complain to the Saptir, the gendarmes. There too, the crazed mothers of Kemach, who, bawling hymns and with sparkling eyes, as though this were a blessed work in the sight of God, cast their children down from a rock into the Euphrates. The Cheters, brigands, killed the young man instantly and mutilated his corpse in a fiendish mockery of the disguise he had assumed. Then, after the most horrible abuse, the girl is tied naked to her groom. face to face with his mutilated corpse. Franz Werfel's novel is based on fact. He changed some names, but the historical event is true. The 4,000 Armenians who fought on Musadagh survived when the French fleet came to their rescue, but others were not so lucky. Over 1 million Armenians perished, victims of Turkish deportations and massacres. The nationalism of the Young Turks could be compared to the racial policy of Nazi Germany. Suren Sarokhanyan and his large family live in Ashnak, a village near the Turkish border. They depend on this stone-filled garden for much of their livelihood. Suren's large moustache is quite common among men of Sasunsi origin. Before 1915, the fortress village of Sasun and the fertile lands surrounding it were inhabited by Armenians. Today, Sasun is within Turkish borders. In the years of the genocide, the people of Sasun, refusing to submit to yet another cycle of massacres, organized under the leadership of the legendary freedom fighter Kevork Çavuş and decided to fight back. Badly outnumbered by Turkish forces, they suffered great losses. Some of them survived by retreating into Transcaucasia. The bloodbath continued even during their flight. Among those who did not survive was Kevork Çavuş. Only 1 out of 5 made it to Ashnak. There they regrouped and joined the core of the volunteer units which defended eastern Armenia against the advancing Ottoman Turkish army. In Soviet Armenia today, only a handful of people know how to sing the old songs of Sasun. This one, like many others, narrates the struggle against the Turkish atrocities. No Armenians would have survived had it not been for the heroic struggles of the freedom fighters. The most famous of these fedai was General Antranik, whose military strategies frustrated the entire Turkish army. The sounds of these bells remind the whole Ararat Valley that in 1918 Armenians repulsed the Turkish army at Sadarabad. That event heralded Armenia's brief history as a sovereign republic. The new republic was repeatedly attacked from all sides. Though the outnumbered Armenians managed successfully to defend their country, it survived for only 2.5 years. The government of the Armenian Republic, besieged by advancing Soviet and Turkish forces, relinquished power to the Bolsheviks, and on December 2nd, 1920, Armenia became a Soviet republic. Yet Armenians never forget their national heroes. In 1964, Azad Minasyan and the villagers of Ujan pulled their resources together and, defying Soviet authorities, erected a statue of General Antranik in the center of their town. Today, the monument serves as a rallying symbol for national independence. Volunteers hold continuous vigils near the statue, for they still fear that various extremists may be planning to topple it. In 1967, Kevork Melkonyan aroused interest in a museum to be dedicated to Armenian freedom fighters. The people of Ashnak raised the necessary funds, and yet the building remains unfinished. The authorities have blocked its completion several times. One month before the museum was set to open in 1990, it was still not clear what mementos it would display. During the dark days of Stalin's reign in the 1930s, the authorities eradicated all symbols related to nationalistic tendencies. Writer Walter Aramian is 80 years old. In 1937, he admitted to the police that he had read some literature that opposed Stalin and Lenin. He was declared a Trotskyite and exiled to Siberia. He wasn't the only one punished for his views. Between the 1930s and the 1950s, thousands of Armenians were repressed or exiled to Siberia. Many spent years behind bars for no reason whatsoever, and the majority of them perished. Upon my return from Siberia, where I spent 15 years of my sweet youth in the gold mines of Kolyma, I didn't recognize my birthplace. The Yerevan I had left was a city of small houses and cordial, hospitable people. People of many nationalities lived side by side. In the early 1950s, they built wide avenues and comfortable flats, but somehow, for whatever reason, the people had changed. They were not so friendly anymore, and every year it's got worse. If we don't search for and reclaim our former values, this nation will vanish without our knowing it. This memorial is dedicated to the 50th anniversary of the Sovietization of Armenia. The people call it Stalin's Phallus. In 1962, the authorities ordered the removal of Stalin's statue. An accident killed 2 of the workers carrying out the order. They were his last victims. 600,000 Armenians had already perished under the dictator's regime. A statue of Mother Armenia now stands in the space once occupied by the dictator. Sword in hand, she gazes over the land that used to belong to her descendants alone. From the beginning of recorded history, Armenia has been a country of ever-shifting borders. At its height, it was the most powerful state in Asia Minor. Karabakh, which was once called Artsakh, has been part of Armenian patrimony for over a millennium. Armenians consider it crucial to their cultural and historical identity and statehood. After the October Revolution between 1921 and 23, Lenin and Stalin, in a political move to appease the Turkic peoples of the area and the government of Turkey, declared Karabakh an autonomous region and put it under Azerbaijani rule. At present, over 120,000 Armenians, comprising 85% of the population, live in this fertile oasis. When General Secretary Gorbachev proclaimed glasnost and perestroika, Armenians took him at his word and petitioned him to rescind Stalin's act by uniting Karabakh with Armenia. February the 21st, 1988, close to 1 million Armenians take to the streets and demand that Karabakh be united with Armenia in accordance with glasnost and perestroika. General Secretary Gorbachev ignores their demand and calls on the people of Armenia and Azerbaijan to restrain their passions and to return to their daily lives. On February the 25th, 4 days after the Armenian demonstrations, Azeri Turks, in a major pogrom, burn and massacre Armenians in Azerbaijan. The world soon learned the name of the Azerbaijani town of Sumgait. They beat my father with sticks until he was covered with blood. Then they broke into the bedroom. All the other rooms, even the kitchen and living room, were filled up by Azerbaijanis. When they came to the bedroom, my father picked up an axe to protect me. They told my father that if he dropped the axe, nothing would happen to me. When my father dropped the axe, one of the band approached him and stabbed him with a dagger. Father fell on the bed under which I was hiding. On February the 26th, my husband returned home with the honors which he had received on the occasion of his 60th birthday. When the Azerbaijanis attacked our house, they searched for gold first. I told them I didn't have any. They began to tear my clothes apart and doused me with gasoline to set me on fire. Finally, they left, taking away my jewelry. I came out of the house to look for my son, who had escaped from the balcony with a fractured head. In the courtyard, I found the burned corpses of my husband and Uncle Volodya. My son was killed, and his body was burned in front of the hospital. I identified his body in the mortuary by his fingernails. I asked the Soviet soldiers to let me take their remains back to Armenia. They didn't allow me. They buried them all in a mass grave. They hacked them with axes and knives, poured gasoline on them and set them on fire. My husband and brother-in-law were burned in the courtyard. Initially, I thought they were burning furniture. I didn't know they were burning people. Many people were killed and their bodies burned. Some were set on fire while still alive. It was horrible. It was horrible. Not even during the war were people so brutal. I have 3 children. I lost my husband, his parents, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law. I didn't believe the baby I was expecting could be born healthy. And our government remained silent. We went to Moscow, to the Supreme Court. What we heard there were just lies and lies. Nobody was given a heavy sentence. In short, killing Armenians seemed acceptable. It's all Gorbachev's fault. They mutilated and killed us for 3 days. The soldiers did not intervene. They didn't pay any attention. Why were they there then? And there were so many of them. May the 2nd is Memorial Day in the Soviet Union. Armenian refugees from Sumgait are afraid to visit the cemetery there. Instead, they remember their murdered loved ones huddled in a temporary shelter near Yerevan. Let the dead rest in peace. Absolve the living of their sins.
70 лет в Карабахе был перманентный геноцид.
Prominent writer-journalist Zori Balayan describes the situation in Karabakh as 70 years of continuous persecution. According to him, the United Nations definition of genocide is not only the physical liquidation of a nation, but also the creation of such conditions that force the local inhabitants to leave their country of origin. That was how the genocide was carried out in Western Armenia in 1915. And this is how it is being carried out today in Eastern Armenia, which is under the control of the Russian state. December the 7th, 1988, 11:41 a.m. An earthquake of 6.9 magnitude destroys 80% of Leninakan, the second largest city in Armenia. Tens of thousands are buried in the rubble. December the 10th, 1988, Mikhail Gorbachev arrives to inspect the disaster. He sets up a special commission to organize aid for the earthquake victims. The world responds with unprecedented speed and generosity. Aid begins to pour in. A special account is opened in a Moscow bank for financial contributions. Gorbachev announces that Leninakan will be entirely rebuilt within 2 years. Leninakan 1.5 years after the earthquake. Only an insignificant number of apartments are ready for occupancy. An Azerbaijani rail blockade of Armenia has slowed down delivery of building materials. It has also stopped the transit of fuels and foodstuffs. "200,000 earthquake survivors are still without adequate shelter. Another 250,000 Armenian refugees have come from Azerbaijan. Today, 1 out of 6 people in Armenia is homeless." May 1990, Opera Square in Yerevan. This is the avenger of our nation. He liquidated Talat Pasha, the perpetrator of the genocide in 1915, the murderer of 1.5 million people. What is your opinion about Gorbachev? Gorbachev wants to destroy the Armenian nation. He's blockading the entire territory. He's emptying Karabakh of Armenians. He's settling Azerbaijanis there, whom we call Muslims. He himself is a Muslim. His name, Gorbachev, Gor, is an Azerbaijani word for cemetery. Remove, remove, remove. Our nation is offended that this square should be named after Lenin. We demand its name be changed to Mesrop Mashdod Square. This man Lenin should be blamed for the fact that Karabakh is under Azeri control, and Stalin, who started the Red Terror of mass executions, continued his work.
Это перестройка, не перестройка, а перемешалка. Он натворил то, что никто не мог.
Gorbachev has committed so much evil that nobody else had managed in the past 70 years. He has damaged everything. He is liquidating the country both from the inside and outside.
Что творится у нас?
Once again, we are living through hard times. The mountain monastery of Kehat. It is as old as the Armenian faith. It's been a summer home of meditation for all Armenian Catholicuses since the 4th century. Its sanctuary, carved out of the mountainside, now serves as a place of worship for all who go there to have their children baptized, their marriages blessed, or to thank God for their good fortune. In my opinion, the Sumgait massacre has not been legally concluded, says Telman Gdelyan, Armenian deputy of the Supreme Soviet. It is the duty of the government to judge justly, to respect the law and to punish the perpetrators of these crimes. Instead, the government did all it could not to bring those perpetrators to justice. We're going to investigate the roots of this terror and mass murder, and that might lead us all away to the high echelons of the government. A massacre of this magnitude could not have been organized by individual extremists. It couldn't have been organized by those few who were eventually sentenced. The events of 1915 have been described as the 9th wave of genocide, which had its origins in 19th century pan-Turkism. Armenians view the latest flare-ups as another manifestation of the far broader agenda of pan-Turkism. This militantly nationalistic ideology aspires to unite all the Turkic peoples of Asia under the leadership of Turkey. It looks like the central government is not capable of defending the interests of this nation. That's why people are arming to defend their motherland themselves. Bondage is not acceptable to them. They swear they'll never allow the bloody events of Sumgait and Baku to occur again. These men are Fedayins. A Fedai is a person who takes a sacred oath to defend his country at any cost and volunteers to serve in a clandestine army. Victory or death is his rallying cry. The new generation idolizes and wants to emulate those heroes of the past who fought to the death in defense of freedom and faith.
օրտնեսի սրբեսի աղս անվան փոր եւ որդոյ ողքուն սրբո այժմ միշտ եւ հավիտյանս հավիտենից ամեն պահպանի ջևույս հավատացած.
This sacrificial lamb, Madach, is dedicated to all those who will soon depart to the front to fight for the freedom of their country.
Արժանավորյա գորքյան փառավել ես քեզ ընթորևն թոքվի սրբո այժմ եւ միշտ եւ հավիտյանս հավիտենից ամեն.
April the 24th, 1990. Groups of armed volunteer army units gather in a show of strength during the commemoration ceremonies on Dzitsanakapert Hill.
Мы находимся на границе
Lieutenant Colonel Yermonin, commander of the Interior Ministry troops in the Goris region of Armenia, which borders on the Azerbaijani region of Lachin, says people on both sides of the border are trying to find a way to get along. However, the shooting that's been going on for months doesn't make it any easier for them. Unfortunately, there are extremists both in Baku and in Yerevan who continue to inflame nationalistic tendencies. The disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region is 7 kilometers beyond this ridge. The Lachin region of Azerbaijan forms a narrow corridor that separates this disputed region from Armenia. Lachin, its capital, is on the edge of Nagorno-Karabakh.
Мы тоже, азербайджанский народ, относится к туркоязычной нации. У нас язык.
Azerbaijanis are one of the Turkic peoples, says Lachin's chief of police. Over 90% of our language, customs and religious practices are identical to those of Turkey. We are proud that Azerbaijanis are Turkish. So, naturally, when people say they hate the Turks for the 1915 events, we feel that they hate us too. January 1990. A new cycle of terror and pogroms flares up in Baku. More Armenians are burned and massacred. Azerbaijani nationalists plan to declare independence. The central government intervenes. Soviet troops enter Baku and restore order. Numerous demonstrators in Turkey express support for their Azeri brothers. Work stops all over Yerevan. Once again, people gather in Opera Square. They are angry, outraged, fed up.
С нашей стороны нет боевиков.
There are no armed groups on our side. We have never attacked the Armenian borders, nor do we have any reason to do so.
Боевики, чтобы напасть на армянскую сторону. Почему? Потому что
Why? Because we don't have any territorial claims. We don't want to kill peace-loving people.
армянский народ мы читали как
To
братский
us,
народ.
Armenia has always been a fraternal nation. We still consider the average Armenian our brother and his nation our good neighbor. January 1990. Several clashes are reported between organized groups from both sides of the Nakhichevan border.
Գնալարի անդն Քրիստոսին, ընդունել զորտեգրությունը նորը երկնավորը, և ծավայել ընդաստուծով, լինել տաճար հոգվում սրտը։
At the time of the worst suffering, the French writer Anatole France said, "Armenia is being strangled to death, but it shall be reborn."
Յուղանուշ հանուն Իսուսի Քրիստոսի, հեղյալի վերակո կրիկ երկնավոր պարգևած անապականության, օծումը սրբության, եղիցի քեզի։
To safeguard the borders of Armenia, newly formed political parties begin to organize clusters of small armed citizens' units. Leonid is the leader of one of these Fedayeen units. Few know his real name. The number of his troops is very closely guarded. They've armed themselves by breaking into Soviet military camps. New recruits are given military training by veterans of the Afghan War. Since the middle of 1989, these troops have taken positions at strategic points on the borders with Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan. Their strategy to annex Karabakh to Armenia by military force, however, is not unanimously accepted by the general populace.
Понятно, что, по крайней мере, это империя, которая всегда опаздывает, когда необходима помощь.
Leonid ranks his four main opponents as follows. Enemy number one is the empire and its central government, which is always late when help is needed, but is always on time when there's a chance to rob the republic of its natural resources or its intellectual potential. Number two, the infamous KGB and NVD. Number 3, the Armenian bureaucrats who try to convince the public that independence is impossible. And number 4, the Turks and Azeris, who are the weakest of our 4 enemies.
Это только 4-й враг, наверное.
At present, there are many hundreds of armed civilian troops. Other sources claim they are in the thousands. They carry army submachine guns and old rifles. Their arsenal also includes unreliable homemade grenade launchers, which are as lethal to the launchers as they are to the enemy. They also use inaccurate meteorological rockets, which have a range of 8 kilometers. The borders of the 2 Soviet republics are no longer the scene of only sporadic fights. This man was elected the Fidai leader of the village of Kushchi, located on the edge of Nagorno-Karabakh. Following the events of Sumgait, armed Azeris surrounded his village. Anticipating a massacre, 115 families of the village armed themselves with axes and 5 hunting rifles. They put up a valiant fight for 2 months. Finally, they were evacuated by helicopters and were relocated to a region near Lake Sevan in Armenia. These villagers left behind their buried ancestors, their 5th century church, and all their worldly goods. He is in anguish, but happy that he is still alive, and that his children have shelter. He considers this village his new home now, and he vows to defend it to the death against all Azeris. There are stiff penalties for the possession of firearms in the Soviet Union, but Armenian self-defense units carry them defiantly. The same could be said of the patriots in Azerbaijan. It is only a question of time when local skirmishes may flare up in an all-out war. The presence of the regular Soviet army would certainly have a dramatic effect. This cemetery is over 5,000 years old. There are Kachkars here dating from the 7th century. It is said that when Emperor Tamerlane attacked, there weren't many weapons in Narrates, and so the villagers dressed up the Kachkars to look like soldiers. When Tamerlane caught sight of this huge army, he ran away in horror. Throughout history, Armenians have revered tombstones. During the Christian era, crosses were carved into the tombstones, and the name Kachkar, cross stone, gained a mystical power over the Armenians. Today, no one knows how many of these relics are scattered from India to Egypt. These cross stones carry a strong religious symbolic charge for Armenians. To them, Kachkars epitomize their cultural heritage and their faith. This church was built in the 11th century and was dedicated to the Virgin Mary. When Azeris came to this region in the 19th century, they destroyed all physical evidence of the Christian faith and culture. The Azerbaijanis have used these sacred Kachkars to build stairs, stables and other edifices. Until 2 years ago, Azeris lived in this village, but after the massacre in Sumgait, fearing retaliations, they and the inhabitants of 32 villages in the Vartenis Armenian region escaped into Azerbaijan. Now we can see how they cultivated this hospitable region. They converted centuries-old Armenian churches into stables. A few Armenian families have moved here to reclaim their ancestral villages, yet most of the houses remain empty. No Armenian wants to live so close to the Azerbaijani border. A freedom fighter takes an oath to have a church built around this newly sanctified portal. They plan to build it so that God showers them with good fortune during the struggle ahead. Will they be able to build a church or even a cathedral here? And if they succeed, will their church be a place of worship, or will it be converted into a stable? Every year on April the 24th, the villagers of Ujan build fires high in the mountains to remind Turks living on the other side of Mount Ararat that Armenians are still alive. Today these fires carry yet another message. They burn to remind the world that fighting is again raging in the country that was once the barometer of war in Asia and Europe. History has shown that the fate of the country, for which God had only a handful of stones left, ought to be a warning to the world.
Kashkajadrani, hey, Jerusalemi, hey, Kashkajadrani, hey, Jerusalemi, hey, Andarani gela warkoch pasarom, shurje shoch vetschump mafidayin. Andarani gela warkoch pasarom, shurje shoch vetschump mafidayin. Kajadrani badvarets turnu mutsenin, bashpangainin kemeklamera.